What's going on, baseball fans? How you doing? So in today's video, we're going to dive into an alternate universe where we discuss what would happen if David Ortiz never left the Twins after the 2002 season. Let's not waste any time. Let's get to it. If there was one player to think of in the last 20 seasons for the Boston Red Sox, many people would say that David Ortiz is the first one to come to mind. All of the walk-off hits in the 2004 playoffs that helped carry the Red Sox back from a 3-0 deficit against the Yankees and eventually helped win a World Series for the first time in 86 years, the franchise record 54 home runs in 2006, that epic go-ahead home run against the Tigers in 2013, and an absolutely insane 2013 World Series against the Cardinals in which he hit .688 that series. However, what would have happened if David Ortiz had never been released by the Minnesota Twins after the 2002 season? A lot would have happened differently, so let's take a dive into this alternate universe. In reality, after the 2002 season, the Twins decided to release David Ortiz and he eventually signed on with the Red Sox. However, in this universe, the Twins decided to hang on to Ortiz by reaching an agreement in arbitration. As for the Red Sox, instead of bringing in Ortiz, they would plug in Kevin Millar as the DH and have Shea Hillenbrand play first, and the newly signed Bill Miller would play third. This means that the Red Sox would have never acquired Byung-Hyun Kim by trading Shea Hillenbrand for him. As for the Twins, Ortiz would eventually slide into the DH role full-time over Matt LeCroy, who would be a backup at first base and catcher, and Doug Mankiewicz remained at first base full-time. Ortiz would build off of his solid 2002 season by having a very good 2003 season, similar to what he had in Boston that year. As for the final standings, the Red Sox would still have a pretty good offense without Ortiz and would still get the wild card, while the Twins would still win the AL Central. With the Twins having a much better offense with Ortiz, they would be able to win another game against the Yankees in the American League Division Series, but they would still fall short, losing in 5 games. As for the Red Sox, who in reality were able to come back from a 2-0 deficit against the Athletics in the first round, were not able to make the comeback in this universe, lacking the big hit Ortiz had in Game 4 against Keith Foulke in the 8th inning. The A's would instead win this series, but still lose to the Yankees in the ALCS, who would still lose to the Marlins in the World Series. This also means we would have never have seen the Aaron Boone walk-off home run in Game 7 of the American League Championship Series. With the Red Sox coming off an early exit in the 2003 playoffs, they head into the offseason looking to improve many aspects of their team. Even though in this universe, the incident where Grady Little didn't pull Pedro from Game 7 never happened, the Red Sox would still move on from Grady Little and bring in Terry Francona. They would still trade for Curt Schilling and would still sign closer Keith Foulke. They would also look to improve the offense as it came up short in the ALDS against the A's. The Red Sox would still try to pull off the huge trade for Alex Rodriguez, but like in reality, they would come up short as the Players Association refused to restructure A-Rod's contract, while the Yankees were still able to pull off that infamous trade. Instead, the Red Sox would look to free agency and sign Miguel Tejada to a 6-year contract to play shortstop. This would trigger the Red Sox to trade Boston icon Nomar Garciaparra to the White Sox for Maglio Ordonez, who were both a year away from free agency. This would mean that the Red Sox would never make the infamous trade deadline deal that sent Nomar to the Cubs and brought in Orlando Cabrera and Doug Mankiewicz. With Maglio Ordonez as the Red Sox right fielder, he would have a solid season and would not have been injured like he was in reality after a collision with White Sox second baseman Willie Harris. This would mean that Trot Nixon would have handled more of the designated hitter duties. With the Red Sox wanting to hang on to Trot Nixon's left-handed bat to balance the lineup out, as well as keeping the power bat of Kevin Millar, they would end up trading Shea Hillenbrand to the Blue Jays for a pitching prospect and plug in Kevin Millar at first. With this offense, the Red Sox would still have a very good team like they were in reality, and they would still win the wild card while the Yankees would still win the division. As for the Twins, they would still win the AL Central. In the playoffs, the Red Sox would have plenty of enough offense to beat the Angels, and while the Twins would once again push the Yankees to the limit, they would still fall to them in 5 games. This would mean that we would still see the Red Sox versus the Yankees in the American League Championship Series. The Yankees would still blow out the Red Sox pitching in the first 3 games, jumping out to a 3-0 series lead. In reality, and in this universe, the Red Sox would be down 4-3 to the Yankees in the 9th inning, facing Mariano Rivera. Kevin Millar would still work the walk against Rivera, which led to Dave Roberts, who they still did trade for in this universe, infamously stealing second base and eventually scoring to tie the game thanks to a Bill Miller base hit. However, while the Red Sox did essentially have Miguel Tejada and Maglio Ordonez instead of Ortiz in this universe, neither of those players possessed the clutch bat that Ortiz had, and the Yankees would eventually win Game 4 in extra innings to sweep the Red Sox. The heroics of David Ortiz would have never happened, Curt Schilling would have never had the bloody sock game, and the greatest comeback in sports history would have never occurred. The Yankees would then move on to the World Series and defeat the St. Louis Cardinals to win their 27th championship. With the Red Sox coming off a disappointing performance in the playoffs, they head into a very busy offseason. In this universe, like reality, they would still see Pedro Martinez depart in free agency to the Mets, they would still sign Matt Clement and David Wells, and Curt Schilling would still be dealing with the ankle injury he suffered in the playoffs the year prior against the Angels. Also, in reality at this time, Manny Ramirez was unhappy in Boston, and the Red Sox and Mets were very close to a trade that would have sent Manny Ramirez to the Mets, with Mike Cameron and their top prospect outfielder Lastings Milledge coming back to the Red Sox. In this universe, with the Red Sox not willing to put up with Manny's unhappiness and antics anymore, especially after a lack of playoff success, they find a way to get this deal done, with the Mets adding in another prospect. This would mean that Johnny Damon would slide over to left while Mike Cameron would patrol center field because he was simply a better center fielder than Damon. The Red Sox offseason would not stop there though. Another thing to take note of is Maglio Ordonez would still sign with the Tigers in free agency, so the Red Sox would swing a trade for right fielder Jay Payton, who would shuffle between right field and designated hitter with Trot Nixon. They would also still bring in John Olerud to help compensate for Kevin Millar's defensive issues. As for the Red Sox that season, while they had Miguel Tejada and Mike Cameron in this universe instead of Manny Ramirez and David Ortiz, the Red Sox would still have a very good team. Speaking of Mike Cameron, he would have never had that ugly collision with Carlos Beltran in the outfield with the Mets, and he would have put together a solid season. In this universe, nothing would change in the standings, with the Red Sox still winning the wild card and the Yankees still winning the division. As for the Mets, with Manny Ramirez in the fold along with the newly signed Carlos Beltran, they would win a few more games, but they would still fall just short of making the playoffs. As for the Twins, with Ortiz still the DH after signing a 2-year deal like he did with the Red Sox in reality, and Justin Morneau now the full-time first baseman along with Joe Mauer being the full-time catcher, the Twins would be a bit better in this universe, but they would still fall short of the playoffs considering how good the White Sox were that season. As for the playoffs, the White Sox would still go on to win the World Series. In this universe, 2006 is where we see the Twins with David Ortiz really take a step forward, while the Red Sox would still take a step back and miss the playoffs like they did in reality. The Red Sox would still make the trade with the Marlins of Hanley Ramirez and Anibal Sanchez for Josh Beckett and Mike Lowell. With Bill Miller and Kevin Millar moving on in free agency, we would see Mike Lowell take over at third base and Kevin Youkilis take over the first base job. The Red Sox would still see Johnny Damon sign with the Yankees, and they would bring in Reggie Sanders on a 1-year deal to play left. They would also re-sign Mike Cameron to a 2-year deal instead of him signing with the Padres like he did in reality. This would mean that the Red Sox would have never traded for Coco Crisp. Another thing to take note of is that the Red Sox would not have made that trade of Bronson Arroyo for Willie Mo Pena, considering they traded for another right-handed power-hitting outfield prospect in Lastings Milledge with the Manny Ramirez trade the year prior. Speaking of Milledge, he would end up debuting later on this season for the Red Sox, and he would end up playing most of the time in left field down the stretch, with Reggie Sanders taking more of a bench role. However, the Red Sox would still miss the playoffs. As for the Twins, with Justin Morneau putting forward an MVP season, David Ortiz finishing third in MVP voting, hitting over 50 home runs, and a fantastic season from Joe Mauer that saw him hit .347 on the year and finish sixth in MVP voting, along with solid seasons from Michael Kadire and Torrey Hunter, the Twins would have one of the best offenses in the game. They also had one of the better pitching staffs in the game, led by Johan Santana, along with an amazing rookie season from Francisco Liriano, before going down with an elbow injury that led to Tommy John surgery. In reality, the Twins would finish with a record of 96-66. However, in this universe, the Twins would finish with 8 more wins, with a record of 104-58, due to the fact that they had Ortiz in the DH spot instead of Rondell White and Jason Kubel, who both combined for -2 wins in reality, while Ortiz had a wins above replacement of about 6. This would change the playoff seeding completely, with the Twins having the best overall record. This would mean that the Twins would face the Tigers, while the Yankees would face the Athletics in the American League Division round. With Johan Santana having the Tigers' number in 2006, along with a high-powered offense, the Twins would beat the Tigers, who were the American League champions that year in reality. The A's would also be able to defeat the Yankees, who played the Yankees very well in 2006 in reality. This would mean that we would get a Twins Athletics American League Championship Series instead of an American League Division Series like we saw in reality. In reality, we saw the A's beat the Twins that year, but with the Twins able to start Johan Santana more than one time and a much better offense, the Twins would beat the Athletics and they would move on to the World Series. Over in the National League, we would still see the Mets and the Cardinals go head-to-head in the National League Championship Series, but the difference this time is that the Mets have Manny Ramirez. With the Mets having Manny in the fold, they would be able to score more runs in that Game 7, and they would move on to the World Series instead of the Cardinals like they did in reality. In the World Series, we would see the Twins versus the Mets, who both had very good teams and a high-powered offense. However, in this series, with the Twins possessing a better starting rotation, including the Cy Young Award winner and Johan Santana, and also a bullpen to match up with that very good 2006 Mets bullpen, we would see the Twins win this series in 6 games, giving them their first World Series championship since 1991, while the Mets' star-studded team would fall just short. In 2007, in this universe, we see the Red Sox take a step forward, while we see the defending World Series champion Twins and the World Series runner-up Mets take a step back. The Twins entered an offseason of question marks, with David Ortiz officially becoming a free agent, as well as the upcoming free agency of Torrey Hunter and drawing closer to the free agency of Johan Santana. The Twins have historically never given out big contracts, and with David Ortiz looking for a bigger payday, he would not return to the Twins. The Twins would go on to miss the playoffs like they did in reality. As for the Mets, with Manny Ramirez, he would still suffer an oblique strain that cut his season short by a month, and with him being out all of September, they would fade down the stretch, and they would still miss out in the playoffs like they did in reality. As for the Red Sox, they would still have a very busy offseason like they did in reality. While longtime favorite Trot Nixon would still depart in free agency, they would still sign J.D. Drew to take over in right. They would also still sign Japanese sensation Daisuke Matsuzaka to go with Josh Beckett and Curt Schilling in the rotation. However, the biggest signing would end up being David Ortiz himself. Yes, that's right. With the Twins unable to pay Ortiz and the Red Sox trading away Manny Ramirez's big contract before the 2005 season, this would give the Red Sox enough financial flexibility to bring Ortiz in. Also in this universe, with the Red Sox needing someone out in left field, we would see Lastings Milledge take over full-time in left. This would give the Red Sox a lineup of Mike Cameron, Miguel Tejada, David Ortiz, J.D. Drew, Mike Lowell, Jason Varitek, Kevin Youkilis, Lastings Milledge, and Dustin Pedroia, easily one of the best in the major leagues. With a solid rotation that's even deeper with Bronson Arroyo still in the fold since they didn't trade him away for Willie Mopena, the Red Sox would actually be a better team than they were in reality, winning 99 games compared to the 96 that they actually won. We would also still see the debut of Jacoby Ellsbury, who would end up taking over the majority of the playing time in center field over Mike Cameron down the stretch, considering he wasn't having a great season in 2007. The Red Sox would still go on to face the Angels in the division round, and they would still advance to face the Indians. The Red Sox would still fall down 3-1 in the series, but they would still have plenty of enough talent to come back like they did in reality and move on to the World Series to face the Rockies. They would still sweep the Rockies, and this would actually be their first World Series championship since 1918, the first time in 89 years instead of the 86 years in reality. Heading into this offseason, we see the Red Sox make some small moves, more notably not re-signing Mike Cameron, who would still sign with the Brewers, so Jacoby Ellsbury would take over in center field full-time. Lastings Milledge would also still be in left field due to the fact that Jason Bay would never come to Boston this season like he did in reality when he was involved in the Manny Ramirez trade to the Dodgers. Overall, the Red Sox would still have a very good team, and while they would make it back to the American League Championship Series against the Rays, they would still fall short because that Rays team was just too good. However, over in the National League is where we would see some major changes. We would still see the Twins trade Johan Santana to the Mets. With Manny Ramirez healthy this season, he would provide much more of a boost for that Mets lineup than the group of Daniel Murphy, Andy Chavez, and Fernando Tatis did in reality. Actually, that group had a combined wins above replacement of 3, while Manny Ramirez had a tremendous season, compiling a wins above replacement of 6. In reality, the Mets had a record of 89-73, but in this universe, with Manny Ramirez giving them 3 more wins, they would have a record of 92-70, which would tie them with the Phillies for the division. Since the Mets won the season series against the Phillies, the Mets would actually end up winning the division, giving the Phillies the wild card instead of the Brewers. Because teams couldn't play teams in the same division in the first round at this time, the Mets would end up playing the Dodgers in the first round, and the Phillies would play the Cubs. Without Manny in LA, the Mets would handle the Dodgers rather easily in the first round and move on to the National League Championship Series. As for the Cubs and the Phillies, I think the Phillies would still be able to take down the Cubs like the Dodgers did in reality in 2008, as the Cubs were cold heading into the playoffs that year and the Phillies pitching was just clicking. In the National League Championship Series, we would see the Mets versus the Phillies, and in the end, the Mets would win this series behind Johan Santana, who would be able to match up against Cole Hamels better than Derek Lowe did for the Dodgers, as he pitched well against the Phillies that year in reality. In the World Series, we would see the Mets versus the Rays, and in the end, the Mets would prevail. That team would be so good due to their stacked offense and solid pitching from their ace Johan Santana, and simply just having more veterans with postseason experience than the Rays did. This would be the Mets' first World Series championship since 1986. In this universe in 2009, there really isn't much change from what we saw in reality. After winning the World Series in 2008, Manny would re-sign with the Mets for 2 years like he did in reality with the Dodgers, but this wouldn't change much for the Mets' fortunes, considering also that he tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs this season as well. We'll see the Mets take a step back like they did in reality, mainly due to poor starting pitching, and they would still miss the playoffs. As for the Red Sox in this universe, we would still see a down year from David Ortiz like he had in reality. We would see Miguel Tejada in the last year of his contract that he signed back in 2004. We would also see Lastings Milledge start to struggle in left field for the Red Sox, so the Red Sox would trade him away and go with Rocco Baldelli out in left for the rest of the season. While this Red Sox team wouldn't have been as good as the one in reality, they would still make the playoffs as the wild card, but they would still get swept by the Angels. For the Mets, Manny Ramirez would be in the last year of his deal, but he would struggle with injuries. However, the notable thing here is that since the Mets would still have Manny, they would have never signed Jason Bay. He would end up signing a 4-year deal with the San Francisco Giants, who needed offense at the time, and Jason Bay lived close by in Seattle in the offseason. Pat Burrell would have never signed with the Giants, Bay would have never gotten a concussion like he did with the Mets, and he would have won a couple of World Series. Not bad if you ask me. So here's a quick rundown of what would have happened if the Twins hadn't released David Ortiz after the 2002 season. Instead of signing David Ortiz in 2003, the Red Sox would use Kevin Millar as the DH with Bill Miller at third and Shea Hillenbrand at first instead of trading him for Byung-Hyun Kim. The Red Sox would still try to trade for A-Rod, but they would still fail. Instead, they would trade Nomar Garciaparra to the White Sox for Maglio Ordonez, and they would sign Miguel Tejada to play shortstop. The Red Sox would not win the World Series in 2004, and the Yankees would win that one instead. The Red Sox would eventually trade an unhappy Manny Ramirez after the 2004 season to the Mets for Mike Cameron and one of their top prospects, Lastings Milledge, who would eventually flame out in Boston. The Twins with David Ortiz would beat the Mets to win the World Series in 2006. David Ortiz would end up signing with the Red Sox before the 2007 season. The Red Sox would finally end their curse in 2007, winning the World Series for the first time in 89 years. The Mets with Manny Ramirez would win the World Series in 2008. And then everything is basically back to normal after 2010. So that's what would happen if David Ortiz did not leave the Twins after the 2002 season. Tell me what you think down below. If you have any ideas for any future what if videos, let me know. But that's all I got for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.